This video is going to be about accessibility, and specifically about accessible transit here in Elliot Lake, where I live. This is a meeting that took place on Monday, July the 10th, from our city council, and it was a chance for public presentations on varying subjects that were on the agenda, and for the council to do their regular business. One of the people who was presenting to council at this meeting was my friend Mike Thomas. Mike has been an advocate for accessibility for years, and you're going to hear him mention that, talk about it. And Mike and I are friends, and I am a bit of an advocate for accessibility myself because I am disabled. And Mike and I share the same feelings about what accessibility is, what it means to people with disabilities. What I think I'm a little bit more militant than what Mike is. But Mike has had more experience being professional about what he says and how he says it. And that comes across very clearly in his presentation in this instance. In Elliot Lake, accessible transit is an interesting topic. We're a small town, 12,000 people, give or take. And we have one handy lift bus. That's one that's a door-to-door service for people who have disabilities, problems getting around. Okay. One of the issues with it is that you have to register in order to be a part of this service. And you have to try and book 1 to 2 weeks in advance of when you want to go. Anywhere, and that's basically in and around town. We don't really have any sort of transit for if you need to get outside of town. And if you know where Elliot Lake is in northeastern Ontario, our hospitals for tests are in Sudbury and Sault Ste. Marie, and both are about a 2-hour travel time, depending on how you go. And in wintertime, that can be longer. And for somebody like myself who has mobility issues, it can be a very difficult process to get there. Even when you're talking around town, you'll hear Mike talk about this as well. I guess I should talk about myself when I talk about this, so I'll go with that. I have 3 different kinds of arthritis. There are mornings when I wake up and I feel like a bus has hit me, run over me, and backed up just to make sure they got it right. It hurts to move. And I'm exhausted. The whole process of being able to move myself around is extremely tiring. I also have issues with neuropathy. So my feet go numb, or my leg falls asleep. Or I get tingling in my hands. In the wintertime, it's horrible. I am so sensitive to cold that it's like it's painful to be outside. Like here, I get a very, very cool rash. That's a part of one of the arthritis that I have, where you know, me and pastry, we have a lot in common. So to say that you can arrange your life and say, oh, okay, so 2 weeks from today, I've got shopping that I need to do, so I'm going to call up, I'm going to make the appointment, they'll come pick me up, the handy lift will come and pick me up at my door, and will drop me back off after I go and I do my shopping. And I could wake up on the date that I picked to go, and not be able to move and sort of go like, oh my God, like this is awful. And sort of go, I don't want to do, I can't do this. I cannot do this. All I want to do is sleep. And that's how it is. So having a system where you have to plan in advance doesn't necessarily work for people with disabilities, things that are mobility issues, people who have fibromyalgia, for example, or who have lupus, any of those things. So it can be a very difficult process. And it's something that needs to be looked at and evaluated and changed. And so this is something that Mike decided that he would try and speak to. And I think he did an excellent job. And I hope that you'll listen to it and see where we're coming from in this, and hoping that council will go with it. So have a listen to Mike.
Public input session. This evening we have one public input from Mr. Mike Thomas. Welcome, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Acting Mayor, members of council. Good to see you again in the summertime. For the record, I am Mike Thomas, and I'm here to speak to item 7.3, as you already stated. But they always ask me to say that anyway when I come up. I've been racking my brain since Thursday trying to figure out what is the best thing to say to you about 7.3, what will have the most value, what will have the most impact. And as many of you know, I've been an advocate for accessibility and accommodation for over 30 years. And I've been quite vocal in our town about it, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. Without besmirching anything that came before this moment in time, what you're facing in 7.3 is an opportunity. And when I say opportunity, it's something that previous councils have had a hard time having success at achieving, is the true meaning of the word of being accessible, of being available, of being productive or timely. And a very good friend of mine almost yelled at me yesterday and said, don't get up there sounding like them, and because we talk about the same things. But to the person that actually uses the bus, what I hope, and what I read in the package, what you've seen before you, is we have the opportunity to have a qualified organization that bid a year ago to complete work by June. For whatever reason, it hasn't happened, but the contract says July 10th, so I presume that they're agreeing to the price from a year ago, which is a unicorn in itself. But what they're going to do for us, and what they're going to do for you, is they're going to highlight in every aspect of their review the words accessibility, not just the cost, not just the hard cost, not just the management or the infrastructure cost, but in every section of that RFP and the tender, you will see the words accessibility. And that's there for a reason. The Municipal Act, the Accessibility Act, the Human Rights Code, the Transportation, there's an entire section of the Municipal Act dedicated to the transportation requirements of municipalities. And by design, if you or I are in Toronto or Ajax or Windsor or Elliot Lake, the standard is the same. Other words that are going to come up in the discovery of this process are called the customer service regulations. Now, what I said before, where other councils have not been successful, is we have unique challenges that I'm very hopeful that this organization is going to recognize. We're a small community. We live in Northern Ontario. We beat the hell out of our equipment on a regular basis because it's not like living anywhere else. That being said, your concerns are always capital costs. Your concerns are always, the prioritization is running the company like a company to get the best bang for the buck possible. Well, I'm here to tell you, and I'm sure that there's 5 engineers that are coming through this report are going to tell you, is that transportation is not a revenue positive business. It's a revenue negative generating enterprise. And what I want to impress upon you, from my voice to your ears, is I always hear there's only one taxpayer. In the prism of transportation, in the prism of accessibility, and doing what's best by the members of the community, there's only one customer. And that's all of us. Everybody that lives here is a customer of this corporation. And when you see what comes forward, and I'm very hopeful that, I believe you're going to say yes to this. I'm hopeful that you do. I hope you ask the right questions, because there's things in that report that would pique curiosities for what I see that concerns you on a regular basis. For finance, for capital costs, for all of those things, for administration, for delegation of how it works. From the eyes of a person with a disability, one of which I am, I can tell you that most of us do not give a second thought to getting from one side of town to the other in 5 minutes. Anybody who rides that bus, if they go to the doctor's, it's a 3-hour tour. If they go to the grocery store, it's a 3-hour tour. If you wanted to run your life through the lens of a person with a disability, you can't imagine what it's like to have a good day, to call specialized transit and say, I want to go do this. That happens for them every day. It's a challenge just to get out, to get someplace. For us as a community, if you bring accessible transit to the forefront and make it work, you'll increase not only the ability of your customers to enjoy what you propose as outdoor activities, commerce to the vendors and the public. And there's myriads of studies that throughout my entire career that say it's worth billions of dollars. I know 2 of you on the panel know this already. Every dollar invested in accessibility returns dividends times 10. That's a fact. And in our particular community, we have an extremely large number of people that suffer that impairment of one form or another. In Canada alone, 1 in 6 people has a disability. In Elliot Lake, that's more than double. If there's 12,000 people, that means 2,000 people have a problem getting around, right? So I'm asking you to do your level best, which I know you all will. And I'm asking you to look at this issue not only as a business exercise, but we are a seniors community, for better or for worse. It's what made it successful. It's what's kept us going. And we need to deliver the ability for all of us to have access to the goods and services that are sold, provided, and needed in this community. And the transportation is the key. Thank you for your time.
That's carried. Item 7.3, report from the Acting Director of Public Works regarding the transit review. We have a motion that Council recognize EXP Services, Inc. as the successful applicant for TRAN 2022-01, and that Council pass the appropriate bylaw to enter into an agreement with EXP Services, Inc. Excuse me, to provide the services as described in TRAN 2022-01 for payment in the amount of $57,588 plus HST. Mover. Councillor Bull, seconded Councillor Morissette. Mr. Golding, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, as presented, the report's fairly procedural. We engaged in a competitive process through RFP issuance last summer. That process came to a close on August 30th, and Mr. Thomas made note of the date. Staff's been challenged by, I don't know if we'll characterize them as shortages or change. It's been a turbulent time for staff since that time. Thankfully, EXP, when approached, stated that they were happy to hold their price from that process, and in fact expressed their eagerness to participate in the project. They find us to be an interesting case study, I believe. So again, happy to hold the price, and we put it forward to you to approve and pass the appropriate bylaw to get going on this. The financial impacts section, Mrs. Sonnenberg and myself went through how the funding for this is likely to work. There's a small chart there. There's ISIP funding available to help support this endeavor, and with this study being done, it informs us on how to proceed with the remainder of the funding that's available through that program. So it's an important first step to this endeavor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Golding. Do we have any questions or comments? Councillor Morissette.
Through you, Mr. Chair, from Mr. Golden. What's the new timeline to get an answer back from them?
Through you, Your Worship, I'll be frank and say that I was happy to hear that they would hold their price. I haven't pushed them too hard for a timeline. My understanding is that they would keep the same relative timeline process, but in terms of specific dates, I'm not expecting an extension in overall timeline, but I'll be in touch with them tomorrow and we can better inform you in the future.
Any further questions? Councillor Flintoff.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Golding. So I realize this is definitely a big necessity, and it's very, very important. You know, as Mr. Thomas had mentioned earlier tonight, we do the 8-month report and everything, and they come back and they give recommendations for infrastructure challenges. I was going through a bit of this and all these improvements in capital planning and everything. So when they come back with this, whatever they come back with, where do we go from there?
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. Well, from there we have better information to make important decisions, is the short answer. So we're tasking this group to engage with the community, to assess its needs, to use their expertise to make recommendations on how we can implement the transit system in an improved way that better matches with the needs of the community, that balances our needs for financial responsibility, that identifies opportunities to improve accessibility for all constituents. And there'll be, I'm expecting, a host of recommendations that comes out in that report for us to consider collectively as a community and for council to decide on how they'll move forward. So it's not a prescriptive, it's not a, it'll be a menu of options that comes out at the end. You can think of it in that way.
And just to follow up, I also noticed they will, which I think is quite important, they will be holding public open houses for the public to give their input to all this too. Did I read that right?
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, I can't say with complete certainty what format that public input will be received in. I know that there'll be an in-person component. I remember reading that in their proposal as well, but we've yet to work out all those details.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Golding.
Any other questions? So it is my understanding that we've never had a transit study done in Elliot Lake?
Not as far as I know, Your Worship, no.
Okay. So it's probably something that's long overdue. Okay, if there's no other questions, are we ready to vote? All in favor? Okay, that's carried.
When your municipal council is going to discuss an issue, I don't care what it is, and I don't care whether they're having a discussion about having experts come in to do a study on what you're talking about. They need to know what those people are going to come in and study, what they're going to be talking about. And that discussion with that council proved that they had no clue what they were talking about, what's coming. The man who was presenting it, Mr. Goulding, couldn't answer the questions for the people that he was talking to. He hadn't done a full range of talking. Well, why the heck not? You're coming to council and you're saying, we'd like to say, to have this around, and we're going to spend quite a few thousands of dollars to have them come back and tell us this stuff that I'm not really sure at the moment what they're going to do, or how they're going to do it. And one of the counselors, who is the chair of the Accessibility Advisory Committee, the committee that is supposed to be by mandate responsible for evaluating the city's needs and potential solutions to accessibility issues that we have, and they're not involved in this project at all. They haven't discussed it, and they only meet once every quarter because that's been the newly established. They figured that's all they need, really. So the Accessibility Advisory Committee, the government mandated committee to handle these issues, has been made redundant by our council. And the man that sits at the head of it will not call a meeting in order to get them involved in it. And that was Rick Bull, and he didn't even ask a question. And Acting Mayor Wannen is another member from council on the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and he said, to his understanding, we've never had a transit review. Guess it's about time. Well, isn't that a concern? Wow. If the best that the council that represents me and other people with disabilities can do is to say, as Mr. Flintoff did, I know how important this is. Obviously not. Because you didn't ask any questions. You didn't expect answers. When somebody said, I believe it was Mr. Morissette, said, how long? And Mr. Flintoff wanted to know what happens after this study is done. Didn't know. We have more information. Good. We could have more information from our own Accessibility Advisory Committee. We could have more information from Googling. What are we supposed to do with it? Where are we going with that? What's the commitment that we're making to accessible transit in Elliot Lake? That was the question that needed answering there. And none of it got answered, and that's irritating.